Okay, so good morning, everyone here. My name is Fran Méndez. I come from Barcelona. Currently, I am working on the Async API project that you might have heard about it or may not. That's why I'm here today. So first of all, before continuing, I want to make it clear. I asked the organization a few days ago to change the subject a little bit about the talk today, because there are many exciting things happening in the Async API specification. And today I'm not gonna exactly explain how we're doing Async API at New Relic, but I will be happy to answer these questions. So before I continue to the show, don't tell, I would like you to raise your hand if you're using Kafka in production. How many of you? Quite a lot already. How many of you are running RabbitMQ in production? Okay, quite a lot as well. MQTT or something like that? Nice, a little bit less. Cool. So the project that I started like 2 years ago is exactly about documenting this kind of APIs. I'm sure that all of you have felt the pain of not having a contract for all your messages in your system. Like, you know that we have RAML, we have OpenAPI, we have many specification languages for our API contracts. But we often forget about the messaging API's contract. Like, and this is especially important because we tend to push messages into a system, a broker, and then we have many consumers. What happens is if the producer of the message suddenly changes the structure of the message, something that sounds like obvious, you should not do that. In large organizations, it happens very frequently, more than one will want to assume, right? So before we go deep into Async API, what I did was to create a specification like OpenAPI, especially to define this contract. So let's go to rapidly to the brief example of the Async API specification, so we know what we're talking about. I don't think you're seeing that. Okay, here it goes. Okay. Is it enough? I think so, right? So as you can see here, what I'm demoing here today is pretty much like the OpenAPI editor, the Swagger editor, sorry, that you can see, find online. But instead of OpenAPI, you see like Async API, right? So this is a document basically containing information about your API. But this API, when I mean API, sorry, when I say API, I mean messaging API, not REST API or HTTP API. You have servers, like we have here, for instance. And in this case, this example is about a product like, for instance, a strict light controller. Imagine that we have an IoT project, and we want to control all the street lights in the street, and we want to monitor them. So this is an example exactly doing that. Like we have an MQTT broker with a port here, and then we have another MQTT broker with another port, because this is for secure MTT, another protocol. And then you have topics. And for instance, you have topic. Who's familiar here with the concept of topic is in MQTT or in Kafka, for instance? Okay, so for those who are not familiar with that, the topic can be like the name of a channel. When you have a system where you can publish channels, messages to channels, you have to name them, right? You have to name the channel. So this is the name of the channel. So street lights, this is a variable, the ID of the street light, lighting, measured. So here we're publishing, it says that we, as a street light, as a consumer of this API, we can publish the current lighting conditions that, the street light has, right? So for instance, these are usually lumens, as you may know, and this usually measures the light intensity. And we have the same thing, like as a street light, we might receive a command from the control center to dim the lights. For instance, we want to dim the light until, I don't know, 20%. So here you have in components, messages, you have dim, correct? And it's an object containing percentage and a timestamp. Cool. So without going too deep in this format, I just wanted you to know what are we talking about before I go into detail. This is pretty much like OpenAPI, right? Actually, it was on purpose. What I did in the beginning was literally copy OpenAPI exactly and say, OK, we need to change paths by topics. We need to change this by this by this. So adapting to a messaging system. Because many people, including me, were in the need to have this kind of contracts for messaging. And the OpenAPI specification was not going to be implemented. So with that, you can generate this kind of documentation, for instance. Like you can generate the documentation, you can generate code, or you can do it the other way around, like I was proposing in the previous talk. You can go design first. You design your API, like in the left side, and then after you design your API, you embed it in your code. Like every time you receive a message, you're gonna check if the message complies with the payload definition that you have there, all the headers, etc. Right? So this is pretty much a simple version of Async API, and I wanted to show you before we go into the next things. Let me share again this. Cool. So now that we've seen an example of Async API document, what is Async API actually? So we have a tweet here from API Handyman. We have him here in the room, which I think it's the best tweet that I found since 2 years ago that best defines what Async API is. It's funny. It's been like more than 2 years, and I think he's the only one that was able to define it properly in a few words. It's exactly what he said. It's OpenAPI, an OpenAPI document, but for messaging, correct? So continuing, this is a specification. I want to make it clear that it's not a software or anything. This is a specification, and with that we can define event-driven microservices or message-driven microservices, IoT APIs, and pretty much anything that's message-based, right? We don't enforce any particular protocol, but we're keeping a list of compatible protocols. And that's due to the many different approaches in the messaging world on how things work. Like some of them have queues, some of them don't have queues, like Kafka don't have, for instance. Some of them, I don't know, they don't even have a broker. They're just peer-to-peer. So like WebSockets, for instance, is not a broker. But you have brokers that have WebSockets. So, you know, this is a mess. So instead of just letting everyone put whatever they want there, we keep a list of protocols. So it's not a library nor a software, but as a way for you to get started with the specification, we provide documentation generators, code generators. We have now some people implementing API gateways and API management tools. Pretty much like what you have, for instance, at MuleSoft with RAML. You could have it with Async API, but for messaging. So, next one. Why will you use a contract like this type? Why will you use Async API? One can think like, this is a new thing. Okay, this guy is here trying to convince us that we should use his technology. Well, maybe that will be the right case, but it might not, because I honestly, I honestly created this technology in order to solve a problem of mine that I had in a previous company at Hitch, at API changelog. But the more I started working on the messaging world, on the messaging APIs, I realized that this is a huge mess. I cannot have the same advantages that I have when I use an API specification. I'm going to create that. Well, I must be sincere here. The first thing that I tried, and I've heard from many people the same story. The first thing that I tried was to adapt OpenAPI for messaging, like hacking in a way like the path is a name of the topic, and then I mean all sorts of tricks. And get is subscribed, and post is published. You know, all sorts of weird stuff. So why I think you should use it is basically because the more I worked on that, and the more I speak to people, the more I realize that this is very useful for them. So I think you should give it a try. But one thing, this is all just subjective stuff from my experience. But the objective stuff is like we, as an industry, we need a common language, right? Imagine that we don't have things like HTTP. Could you imagine the web today without HTTP? That would be a mess. That would be insanely a mess. Like, imagine having to navigate into different, or the browser have to implement different kind of protocols, and I mean that will be, or even, for instance, imagine that you have to implement your websites, and for your websites, and I'm not talking about JavaScript frameworks, you had to use something different than HTML, or you could use like many technologies, not only HTML. You could use other ones, XML, imagine, or whatever. That would be a mess too. So we need a common language for everyone to understand each other, to share data. One of the main purposes of Async API was to make it machine readable, because that was the whole idea, right? You can have human readable documentation, which might be very nice and beautiful, and it might explain things in a nice way, but that cannot be parsed by machine. That cannot be probably shared into with another person in the world that doesn't speak the same language. for instance. So we need something that can be exchanged, and especially between machines. But at the same time, we wanted to keep it simple for humans. Again, coming back to the API definition, I want to reinforce the point here, and especially because we are at Nordic APIs, and this is one of the places, the conference that I like the most. And actually, my first conference outside Spain was here, so I'm glad to be here again. I want to be here explaining why we should reinforce the point that APIs are not just HTTP APIs. I want to make the point like messaging APIs are also APIs. Because if you think about it, every time you publish a message into a broker, you are causing programmer change or action in another systems, which is exactly what you do whenever you do a post request or put request in HTTP. And whenever you get a message, you subscribe to a broker, and you receive a message, this message might cause, or might not, but might cause something in your system or in your application to do something. So you are programming a system through an interface. So this is an API. And as an API, we need to take control of the whole life cycle. And it has the same problems of REST APIs or HTTP APIs or GraphQL APIs. It has the same problems. You have to take care of the design. You have to take care of the documentation, code generation if you want or not. You can do testing, API management, all sorts of things, right? But these are very different. So we need to have a way to define it. So on the subject of why you should use it, and I think this is a good reason for that, I could have made it private and create a company from that specification. I actually had the offer to do it, but I wanted to keep it public and open source and community-driven. I want it to be the standard way of doing it. I want it to be the open API for messaging, if you want, like API Handyman said. You know? So if you're ever interested in collaborating, please go there, because we really need your help there. Briefly, how to get started. I'm not going to say here how to get started because I only have 25 minutes and I want to tell you more things, more stuff. But I can point you to some places to where you can start. For instance, the code editor that I was using in the beginning is an online editor that's at editor.asyncAPI.org. And in the GitHub organization, you have much more stuff like code generator, documentation generators. I will be also happy to help. You have documentation. We have now a team of people helping with the documentation. I would like to thank Kim Lane. I would like to thank James Higginbotham. I mean, many people. I cannot mention all of them here because there are too many. But thanks to them, because they are working a lot on the new documentation, on blog posts explaining how to use it, and also you always have the Slack channel where I usually reply almost immediately, and yeah, I will be happy to help. So, and now it's the reason why I changed the subject of the talk briefly is exactly the next slide. So until now, this has been a side project of mine while I was working at Hitch or at New Relic. This is not a side project anymore. This is a full-time project now. I'm glad to say here today for the first time that I'm going to create a foundation in the next months together with the people you see here, Salesforce, MuleSoft, SAP, Slack, API Evangelist, Gillane, and TIBCO for now. So I think this is getting interesting. And I'm also here today as a way to say, please join us in the effort of standardizing that. Don't worry if whatever company you see there is a competitor of yours, because we actually, and I don't want to say we, I want to actually put as much competitors in the foundation as possible, so the specification is not biased to one or the other. So it's fair to everyone, correct? So yeah. Also, I would like to note that we are looking for individual contributors. We need, for now, we need people writing stories about it, documentation, code generators, whatever idea you have. You're welcome, basically. You're welcome for that, because that's a lot of work. And yeah, so thank you for that. I'll be happy to answer your questions now and during the whole day, and whatever questions, things you want to comment, I'll be happy to answer them. So thanks.
Okay, I got a couple questions, but I'll let you guys take yours first. Yep, way in the back.
Thanks. I have two questions. One, if someone is using Avro schema, is this a replacement for this, or is?
Yeah, it's not the first time I get this question, so thanks for raising that. I should have explained. No, the short answer is no, it's not a replacement. Actually, the problem is that as it is right now, and to make it compatible with OpenAPI, we're using this sort of JSON schema for the payloads and all the data. But I'm working actually right now on the version 2, and one of the features is to support multiple schemas. Like you can define your schema with Avro, proto-buffers, whatever you want. So thanks.
Thank you. And can I have a second question? Do you describe only topics and message structure, or also maybe some specifics that come with streams, like retention time, stuff like this?
Yeah, we kept it simple on purpose. We only pretend to define, not pretend, I think this is a false friend from Spanish. We only want to define topics and messages because these are common in almost every messaging system. We don't want to go into detail into queues or into stream details, because these are very vendor-specific details. However, most of the times, you can define all these details in headers, and the messages can have headers. So you can also define the headers you need in the message. Also, briefly, we are also working on the version 2 on a feature that will allow you to have specifics for every vendor. Like in a message you want to have, or while connecting to a broker, you want to have different setups, depending if it's RabbitMQ, Kafka, or whatever. So that will be possible as well.
Great. Other questions?
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Have you already figured out some versioning strategies which would from your real-life experience or from some contributors? Because
Sorry, I didn't understand. If I realize what, sorry?
have you already figured out some suggested versioning strategies for how to evolve these APIs? Because with the messaging APIs, this is pretty crucial as well.
You made a good point, because actually, I'm going to share something quickly here that will answer your question. There is a document in the Async API organization. I don't have internet. Oh, cool. True. Okay, so I'll briefly explain. There is a document in a repo on the GitHub organization that explains a strategy for versioning messages over time and how to structure the name of the topics. So the version is on the topic. This is pretty much the same strategy as putting the version on the path in a HTTP API. Like the path in this case will be the topic. So I would like to show you more. I can probably share later. But yeah, I will share it on the Slack channel. We have a strategy for that, but this is separate from Async API. It has nothing to do. But I started this at the same time as Async API because I figured out I realized about the problem and had to figure out the solution. So yeah, we have something. I will share on the Slack channel.
Perfect. Other questions? I have a question then. Why create a foundation? Why not do this work in the IETF where there's already the security event working group?
On what, sorry?
IETF.
IETF, what is it?
Internet Engineering Task Force, the one that gives us TLS,
true.
HTTP, TCP.
Well, well, that's true. I never thought about these foundations or groups. To be honest, the first thing that people ask me always is, when are you merging to OpenAPI initiative? I always get the same question. And I think I will not do it for now for the same reason, because we need speed now. Mm-hmm. We need to move faster. And this will block development, and that will be blocked by something we don't control. You know, like legals and stuff that, and long processes, you know. And I don't want to be dealing with that for now. For sure, this is the way to go. Either OpenAPI initiative or another group, or I think this is the play it should be.
Yeah, I recommend that. I mean, the security event working group, I mean, they got that security token event RFC done in very short order. So I think it's a
I agree with
to
you.
work with, or something else like OpenID. Other questions? I think we might be out of time anyway, but one more. Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing your information there, Fran.